Well, it's time now for our political panel. It's all about the election. I'm joined by former Liberal leader John Hewson and former Kevin Rudd advisor Bruce Hawker. Gentlemen, welcome. Nice to have you both in the studio.
How are you?
I'm well. Now, let's talk about, there are sort of issues, problems on both sides of politics really at the moment, but Chris Bowen had to clarify two measures that Labor will not restore. Bruce Hawker, the school kids bonus won't be reinstated. Scott Morrison has come out very strongly this morning saying they've been campaigning against the government's measures right up until, and said they would do it right up until election day. Now they're saying, oh, we can't afford to restore the school kids bonus. And also they're not going to change the aged pension assets test. Now, is this backtracking? Is it clumsy?
No, you have to make your promises fit the available money. And as I understand it, Chris Bowen made it quite clear that the PFO, the pre-election economic and fiscal forecast, made it impossible for them to pursue those campaign issues, or those policies as campaign issues. I think that's an appropriate thing to do.
But it was sort of handled pretty clumsily. In fact, he had to come out and clarify. It wasn't an open statement. He clarified when one of his front bench team
that was not tidy
yesterday.
Look, that was not tidy. There's no doubt about that. But I think it'd be much better to sort this out now rather than 3 days before the election having costings coming out which suggest that you're going down a route that you can't afford. So I think that was an appropriate thing. Not tidy, but the proper thing for doing. I think Chris Bowen demonstrating an important message for Labor, and that is that they are going to be guided by the amount of money that's out there in the budget and they're forming their policies.
John Hewson, messy for David Feeney to have sort of stumbled so badly in that interview with David Spears.
You don't have gotcha moments anymore. You have, Feeney moments. You can't believe it. Here he was on television last night saying I've been the worst performer in the campaign so far. And then he did it again just to make the point. I think the facts are that both leaders have been pretty good in terms of trying to stay on message, and they've been distracted by their own colleagues on both sides, making fairly silly mistakes or statements which has taken them off message. It's been hard for Shorten to get his message across on health or education, and for Turnbull to keep talking about jobs and growth. I mean, because they've spent a lot of their time talking about everything else that somebody else has done, and it just seems that they keep giving.
All right, well, it's interesting. Let's go to one of these central issues, not the jobs and growth and education and health, but black holes in budgets. Now, John Hewson, you were the leader, you've been to campaigns, you both experienced at this. Black holes, were they around when it seems every campaign it comes up, one side accuses the other, or who's ever in power.
Look, I remember distinctly at the end of the Fraser government, where Treasury had battled for 7 years or so post-Whitlam to drive them to more fiscal restraint. And, Fraser loses the election, in comes the new Hawke Labor government, and there's a $10 billion black hole, which has got to be fixed by the incoming government. And it used to be a way that the official family put pressure on governments to actually deliver better fiscal or budget outcomes. In more recent times, of course, both sides accuse the other side of having a black hole. And right now, the position's ridiculous because both sides, neither of them really believe the forecasts are in the budget. They know they're optimistic. I mean, Chris Bowen gave a press club address recently going through each of the forecasts to say how bad they were, and that when he got into government, he'd have the Parliamentary Budget Office give us the honest statement of the economy, and then he'd have a mini-budget. Well,
right,
but they're still using those numbers
John
to
Hewson,
run their policy.
Is it enough for Treasurer Morrison? He put out the 67 billion black hole figure the other day, then fairly quickly that was found to have a black hole in it itself, and he's now sort of not really backing away from that 67 figure. This morning he said, well, I said it could be up to 67 billion. He was backing away from naming it again, but then he mentioned the figure again. Is it enough to just throw out these rubbery, fairly wildly exaggerated figures and then say, oh, well, it's up to either the media or the other side to make sure they're true or not?
Look, I remember that famous Clinton statement, it's the economy is stupid. And unfortunately, both sides seem to be taking the electorate as stupid because they're feeding this stuff out. They're not accurate numbers by either side. My black hole's smaller than your black hole sort of stuff. That's ridiculous. And I think out there, that's just a dull roar. I mean, I think the electorate is sick of all those sort of accusations. They know neither side has got the money for the sort of commitments they've made. And take a 10-year view, 15-year view, health, education, defence, infrastructure, national disability, national broadband are all unfunded as you get beyond the budget period. So, whoever's in government's going to have a really tough time dealing with the reality of our economic circumstances.
Well, and I think in the case of that press conference, it was very clumsy. I think you should know the truth before you start lying, really. And in that case, I don't think they did.
You're talking about Scott Morrison?
Absolutely. In the course of that press conference, $30 billion disappeared out of his equation. And, of course, he misrepresented the amount of money that Labor was going to spend on foreign aid.
All right, but then he does come back to making a central point that, whatever the budget black hole figure is, they're going to not be able to fund more spending promises than we are.
And it's so confusing now that everyone just scratches their head. I saw James Massola in this morning's Sydney Morning Herald doing a valiant job at explaining it, and my eyes glazed over by, the third sentence, which had gone to about 100 words.
But is it enough that they muddy the waters and just keep this message, the central message going that Labor spends what it can't afford?
Oh, look, that is going to be a strong suit for the Libs. It always is, and they'll keep doing that. Unfortunately, in the case of this government, though, there's an easy response to that, and that is, since the last PFO in 2013, spending's blown out by another $100 billion, and the deficit's blown out. So, debt's blown out. Everything is blown out under this government when they were expected to be fiscally responsible. So the argument just doesn't have quite the same traction when you actually sit back and look at what they've been doing in their 3 years in government. If they had managed to get away with the sorts of cuts that were being advocated in the first budget, then they might be in a position to say those things now. But they were never going to get away with them. They had to increase their spending, and now they're trying to accuse Labor of having a bigger spending budget and being more profligate. And as John says, it just comes down to, my black hole's bigger than your black hole. It doesn't really work.
And look, in the end, it's going to be determined by trust. I mean, the electorate will make a judgment who they trust best to manage the economy. Now, the Liberal Party's always had an edge in better for economic management, and Labor's always had a better edge on education and health. And the electorate's left to decide whether that's still the case. And right now, I mean, they're muddying the waters, making it hard. But I think the electorate will go on. They'll make a judgment on trust. Do we trust these guys to actually deliver what they say, or the bulk of what they say? Or are they just going to take a completely cynical view? I don't trust any of them. They won't deliver anything they say.
When they get into government, and just on that, and it's where you're going to put your spending, is it into health, is it into education? That's Labor's strong point there. It's all very well to show the cuts, but where are we actually going to get some benefits from this?
Well, it is actually interesting because the Sky News Omni poll, opinion poll, has shown that when asked about what sort of policy priorities people want, voters are saying overwhelmingly they want it in health and education, but only 9%. The majority don't want a company tax cut. So, John Hewson, it is interesting. Malcolm Turnbull has been out every day of the campaign selling the corporate tax cut for small and medium-sized businesses. And again, in Rockhampton today, he was asked this question. He does keep explaining it in, as far as I can tell, in more general terms about the corporate tax cut will lead to jobs and, what did you say, banker terms?
Yeah.
Right, well, maybe that message is not getting through, that he hasn't sold to the electorate why a corporate tax cut is important for ordinary people.
Look, I think that what they've got to do is put some substance behind this jobs and growth mantra. I mean, people want to know where the jobs are going to come from, which industries, and how long is it going to take. Those sort of questions are pretty basic, and they're ducking those by just staying with the mantra and talking about a company tax cut. Now, a lot of small businesses know that's great to get a company tax cut, but I've got to be making profits to benefit, and I'm not making money right now. Most of them are struggling, and the suspicion is, OK, the top end of town's doing pretty well. They'll get a decent tax cut eventually. But then, of course, we all know that that's unfunded. Going through to 2025, we don't know any budget numbers. We just know that overall it's going to cost about $50 billion. and we don't have $50 billion.
And of course, the real issue comes down to, well, it's fine for small business to get tax cuts, but what's in it for me? When the times are good, it's great. You know, well, they're getting a cut and we're getting in their tax rate, and we're getting a cut in our tax rate, and we're getting benefits in health and education. But when they start dropping away and people start feeling the pressure, they look over at business and say, well, why are you getting it and we're not?
Because so the government hasn't established that link between, well, if business gets it, it's supposed to trickle down to workers.
Yeah, that's right. They tried. They said, look, you give the company a tax cut, they'll employ more people. Well, in our system, most companies, at the top end of town in particular, distribute more to their shareholders. They don't necessarily invest. They don't necessarily employ. And when you've got to deal with that, you've got to deal with that reality.
Exactly.
Sorry, John, are you actually saying, therefore, that a company tax cut will not?
Well, the Treasury numbers are very modest growth impacts from these sort of company tax cuts, and always depends on the rest of your assumptions and so on. But look, the world has been struggling now since the GFC to see a pickup in business investment in any of the major industrial countries. Even with 0 to negative interest rates, they haven't had the pickup in investment they thought they'd have. We haven't seen it here. The numbers in terms of non-mining investment were supposed to pick up quite dramatically last year and again this year. They're running at about half the pace that was said they'd be. The investment growth is not there. Without the investment growth, you're not going to get jobs. You're not going to get the benefits that would otherwise come from a tax cut.
And your point's absolutely right. You need to put a number on these things. You need to put figures on it. When you're doing political advertising, political campaigning, you need to say there will be X 100,000 jobs created out of this, or they're going to
kept to that, and
well,
then
that doesn't matter. If you want to cut through with an ad or with an argument, you actually have to put some numbers around it, and you have to be able to demonstrate the benefit and how it's going to happen.
All right.
If you don't, you're in trouble. In
about 10 seconds, where's the campaign at in terms of, is anyone ahead or losing badly, or are the electorate not engaged fully yet?
Well, I think, they're not engaged, that's for sure. But I think Labor is having a better go of the campaign. I think they're more disciplined. And I think Shorten has performed above expectations. So far on points, I'd be giving it to the opposition.
John?
Shorten's done marginally better, there's no doubt. But, you know, Feeney's working pretty hard for the government.
All right, gentlemen, we will have to leave it